baby. Hey, I apologize for being late. Give me 1 second, okay? I've got to grab something I printed out upstairs. Forgive me. It's been a little while since I've gone live, so I hope you guys can forgive me. It should be pretty interesting. Won't be a terribly long live, maybe less than an hour, to go through somebody who is named Paul Kelly, Paul Vaccarelli, fascinating New York gangster of old New York. Probably the last of the what Herbert Asbury said was the last of the real gangsters and the real gangs. Not the last of the real gangsters, I'm sorry. The last of the real gangs of New York. Give me 1 second. Please hit the like. And if somebody comes in here, just say, I'll put it in here. All be right back. 1 minute. 1 minute for the presentation. Okay. Sorry. I got my phone here. Let's see. Yeah. Alrighty. Sorry. Sorry, here I am. Got my stuff. Thank you. Okay. Here I am. Back. Move this closer. I have a presentation to show you. I just wanted to say, hey, sweetie, I'm watching a bust on cake. Have a great day. Okay, I hope it's a good bust. Something interesting. Thank you. Appreciate it. It's been a minute, right? Let me share on my screen my presentation. And thanks for the hearts and everything. Totally appreciate it. Yes, it's me, Julie. Gosh, I restarted my uh, YouTube channel, although it takes, let's see, Michelle. It takes, I don't know. They said it takes 8 business days to like actually restart your channel, like totally, like where people, your subscribers are back, whatever. I don't know about that, but I have a speaking engagement um, that I had committed to quickly, and I committed to before, and I'm going to go through with it. And so I wanted a couple things on my YouTube about um, some items related to my book, A Gangster in the Family, which is coming out shortly. And this character, Paul Kelly, was a real person. Paul Vaccarelli was his real name. He plays a small but very pivotal role in the story of my gangster relative, whose name is Jacob Gurr Shapiro. Uh, so it's something to have out there about who Paul Kelly is, because a lot of people are not familiar with him. They're certainly not familiar with his real name, which is Paul Vaccarelli. Yes, I did change rooms, by the way. My office is back behind this wall. I think there's better light in here because I get the natural light. Um, and, but he was, you know, the last of the great old New York gangsters. Forgive me, my bra strap. That's better. I'll cut that out later. Um, I'll cut that out about my bra strap later. Um, and of the last great gangs of New York. And Herbert Asbury, who wrote the book Gangs of New York, which the movie is based on, said that we don't really have any more gangs in New York when he wrote his book. Let me share my screen so you could see. Low key. So sweet. Thanks for being here. Appreciate it. All right. But Paul Kelly was born before my relative, Jacob Gurra, Gurrah, was the nickname that he was given, or they took on. He was slightly older than him. Back then people had children young, so you would say maybe he's the generation before, like 25 years older. Actually, I'll see exactly. Yeah, he's not quite 25, 20 something years. So he could have been Jacob Gurr Shapiro's father's age. But he was, in fact, a contemporary of him, meaning that they lived at the same time and they operated at the same time, although this was at the end of Paul Vaccarelli, formerly first Paul Vaccarelli, then he changed his name to Paul Kelly to sound more Irish, and then back to Vaccarelli when he went legitimate, supposedly. And they operated, especially at the end of Paul Vaccarelli's career, and my relative, Jacob Gurr Shapiro, they operated in New York at the same time. And in some ways, and then their paths crossed at a very pivotal moment, what I would call my relative's rendezvous with destiny that would ultimately bring him to gangster infamy, stardom, whatever would elevate him. And it was because of that interaction. Here, take a look. Let me share. Window. Share. All right. This was on my You, you're so sweet. This was on my thumbnail. That's a very good picture. Actually, AI did a little nose job on Paul Vaccarelli. You'll see in this picture. But the picture behind him were members of his actual gang. Um, and he was, as I said, the Five Points gang operated out of Five Points, New York, which is a little section in lower Manhattan that came into infamy as a place of poverty, vice, meaning vice is are things like gambling, prostitution, uh, you know, bars, out nightlife, that kind of thing. Aw, Becky, thank you. I am. I am okay. Totally. Totally, totally. Thank you. So sweet. And I'll do at the end of this, I'll do a little Q&A if you want me to. Because I know you guys probably wondering some things about how I've been doing, what's been going on, blah, blah, blah. And we'll do that. But first, let me get through this because it's very important. I am going to edit out a little bit of the beginning when I had to go back upstairs to grab my paperwork. It's important for me to have some material out there related to my book, which is coming out quickly, A Gangster in the Family. And this is him, Paul Vaccarelli, aka Paul Kelly. He was born, his actual name was Francesco Paolo Antonio Vaccarelli, shortened to Paolo Antonio Vaccarelli, or Paolo in English. A lot of people who have their name Tracy. Yes. Oh, and Spencer. I am going to do a little Q&A at the end of this, Tracy, to tell you guys some updates about me, about Spencer, what's been going on, answer some questions, how I've been doing, what's been going on, and everything else. But I do have some good things to say about what's been going on with Spencer, which is nice to say. Couple of, bumps in the road, of course, but he was born in 1876. Now, my relative was born probably 1897, although we don't have a birth certificate for my relative, Jacob Gurr Shapiro. My relative, Jacob Gurr Shapiro, was, if he could be compared to the dons of modern day, right? Mafia dons of the modern day, he would be like a quiet don, like Russell Buffalino was. He operated very low key, behind the scenes kind of thing. He had a partner who was more famous than him. They were partners since their teen years, Louis Lepke Buchalter, who was the only known gangster in the United States who actually was put on the electric chair. Leader of what they call gang. And he was known, they said that Louis Lepke Buchalter and Jacob Gurr Shapiro were head of Murder Inc. Lepke Buchalter said, "We were never head of Murder Inc. We were just their best customers." A little bit of semantics. However, it is true, because the fact is that Murder Inc. were, hitmen for hire. And Louis Lepke Buchalter and Jacob Gurr Shapiro and other gangsters of their era who were, at the top of their, whatever their chosen field is, whether it be bootlegging or labor racketeering or gambling or prostitution or whatever they might be doing, didn't have the time to like stake out places and wait, see someone's comings and goings so they can put a hit on, they can actually carry out a hit on them. They actually contracted those kinds of things out. But before there was Lucky Luciano, Meyer Lansky, Jacob Shapiro, Jacob Burr Shapiro, Louis Lepke Buchalter, Bugsy Siegel. There were gangs of New York. And Paul Kelly was one of the most influential, Paul Vaccarelli was one of the most influential underworld figures in New York City's history. He's remembered as a gangster. However, in his early life, he was a skilled boxer, and he never backed down from a fight. Can't wait to hear about Spencer. Just love him. Becky. And you know what? I love you. Thank you. You've been wonderful to Spencer and to me. And he never backed down from a fight. He was a political fixer, as were any successful gang leaders of that era, because elections could be easily fixed. They didn't have voter registrations the same way. They would say, vote early, vote often. People would be repeat voters the same day, and they could get out the vote, or they could intimidate people from voting if they didn't think they were going to vote the way that they wanted them to vote. And for this intimidation or getting out the vote organization, they were rewarded by the politicians, who themselves were really criminals, in the public sphere, with protection. If they were arrested, they would get released. But Paul Vaccarelli, same person, his methods helped shape modern organized crime. He immigrated to New York as a child with his family. He worked as a bank clerk, actually. He worked as a longshoreman. What is a longshoreman? A longshoreman is somebody who works at the docks, unloading or loading these cargo ships, right? We have longshoremen today, the International Longshoremen's Union, of which for a time, Paul Kelly was a president and a vice president. Interestingly, I recently went to the Longshoremen's Union's website, and they had a little section on their history. And I noticed they really did not mention Paul Vaccarelli, as one of the people who was a past president twice of their union. Interesting. Let me go to the next slide. We have here, hang on. There was a movie, actually, before I show you the one with the movie Gangs of New York, let me show you the real book. This is a picture from the movie Gangs of New York, a Martin Scorsese film. I love Martin Scorsese, favorite director of all time. This movie was released in 2002. On the right part of facing me, right part of my screen, that's Leonardo DiCaprio. For whatever reason, he looks like Matt Damon in that picture to me. I have no idea. He looks like Matt Damon. That's Cameron Diaz, and that's Daniel Day-Lewis. I think Daniel Day-Lewis won an Academy Award for this. I'm sure it won multiple Academy Awards. And here's a scene, if you recognize, he played a character, Daniel Day-Lewis did, who is a brilliant, brilliant actor, called Bill the Butcher. This is a scene from The Gangs of New York by Martin Scorsese. Paul Vaccarelli, is in the book Gangs of New York. But the time period that Martin Scorsese focused on was a time period a bit before Paul Vaccarelli's rise to power. So, like I said, with my relative from a gangster in the family, Jacob Burr Shapiro, he was, 20-something years younger than Paul Kelly. Well, Paul Kelly would have been at least 20-something years, if not more, younger than Bill, the one who was Bill the Butcher. These were all real people. And and they were written about. The movie was based on. Have you ever heard of? Oh, Carleone? I know you told me. I may have spelled it wrong. I have to look them up. I have, and I looked them up. You've been worried about us. I know. Um, Carleone. I will. Honestly, Becky, stay tuned. So here's the book that the movie was based on. It was called The Gangs of New York, an informal history of New York's underworld by Herbert Asbury. Herbert Asbury was a journalist, and he documented the gangs going back from, the earliest time of Lower Manhattan's history that he could document all the different gangs of New York, which had a lot of very colorful names. In the movie, they focus on the natives and the plug uglies. He was your dad. He was best friends. He was my best friend's dad. Where did he operate out of? What area did he operate out of? Carleone. Um, and the area that he covered was Little Five Points. Little Five Points is an area of Lower Manhattan where 5 streets kind of come together. And that was shown in the movie. I'm going to show you a closer up picture of this one is the original cover of the book of Herbert Asbury's book, The Gangs of New York. There have been updated covers since then, but this was the original cover. It was published by Knopf Publishing. Shauna. Shauna is my longest member, 9 months. Oh my God. Does that mean we're having a baby? I love it. I believe it may be New York. Do you know specifically where in New York? Like, was it Manhattan, Queens, the Bronx, that kind of thing? I'll find out for you. Oh, no baby. All right, no baby. Yeah, no babies for us. I don't know. I can't. I mean, I love babies, but I don't necessarily want to hear babies on my live streams. I don't know about you. So no baby, but friend for sure. Let's look at a closer up picture. I have to be careful today what I say. I'm prone to like throwing, little things here and there. And I don't mean him. I really don't. But that's what happens when you go live. This is a closer up picture from the original thing. You could see here like how they're portrayed on there. Obviously, Herbert Asbury didn't do the. It was published in 1928 or something, I believe, by Knopf Publishing, and Herbert Asbury, in his book, in the very first part of his book, in the very first sections of his book, points to an incident that involves my relative as kind of what brought the great, and I use the word great, not at meaning that they were good, but large, impactful, brought the great gangs of New York to an end. So that's why it's important to my book. In addition to that, Paul Vaccarelli himself, actually had their lives intersected and they connected late in Paul Kelly's life when he went legit and brought about an incident that was absolutely wild. I actually read a little excerpt from my book describing this incident where my relative, and another man who was a musician were walking down Essex Street in Lower Manhattan. Manhattan's Lower East Side, when a group of men pulled up, exited a car, and opened fire on them. They were both shot twice, and two female bystanders were also shot. Everybody survived, but Paul Kelly, um, he definitely wasn't behind the shooting, but at that time period was when my relative was actually involved with Paul Vaccarelli. He did he worked as a longshoreman very briefly. He really didn't, of all the things that he later became, worked in unions, union organizing, labor organizing, okay, um, to a certain extent. But he never really actually practiced any of the trades of the different unions he became heads of. He was a bantamweight boxer. I don't know what actual weight a bant. I should have looked that up. What is a bantamweight? Um, they have different weight classes, like they have featherweight, lightweight, heavyweight, bantamweight. I'm not sure what weight class that is. And during his boxing career, he adopted the name. He changed his name from Paul Vaccarelli, obviously a very Italian sounding name, because he was Italian from, I think he was from Basilica. Yeah, Basilicata, which is a province, one of the provinces of Italy, in southern Italy. And he changed his name when he became a boxer to Paul Kelly. He thought that would make him more accepted because at that time, sports were dominated by Irish fighters and Irish promoters. When we think about the history of immigration to the United States, the big waves of immigration to the United States, right, after the original migrations to the United States by white settlers, when we were colonies, we're talking just prior to the turn of the 20th century, so mid 1800s through all the way up to about 1920, let's say, and then the government kind of put the lid on immigration. But and they came in different waves, and the Irish immigrants were one of the first big waves. I mean, there were the German immigrants, there were the Dutch immigrants, there were the German immigrants, there were the Irish immigrants. And they came in big numbers because of the potato famine that happened. And they were literally looking for a way of life. They were starving in Ireland, and they came. And basically, what happened is any group that got here before the next group arrived from a different country, kind of claimed superiority to the newest group coming in. The Jewish people from Europe and the Italians came about the same time period, and which is kind of why they ended up connecting by where they lived in New York and also culturally. So you could see here in this picture, we have people, we have babies, and you have little kids who look like they're wearing, their clothes are kind of falling off them. They're wearing scraps of clothing. And this person down here is, I think they're what they call rolling a drunk, right? Somebody's passed out. And now that these kids are playing with this person, this drunken man who's now passed out, probably robbing him. This was the vice of the time. A lot of street kids of the time period. Here is a picture of actual members of Paul Kelly's gang, some of them. Paul Vaccarelli. Again, he was a successful boxer. He went by Paul Kelly. The gang, at one point, before they became the 5 Points Gang, called themselves the Paul Kellys. They took his name as the name of the gang. They called themselves the 5 Kellys. And if you see these young men in this picture, if you look closely, you see the one on my right in the first row, the third from the right. He's usually holding a knife out like this. um, they're dressed in suits. They kind of have their hats tilted. They're all kind of trying to present themselves a certain way, as tough guys, the way they're standing, the way they're together. And they call themselves the Kellys before they became the 5 Points Gang. And Paul Vaccarelli was very good at organization, at leadership, and recruiting people to be gangsters, and identifying who would make a good member of a gang. Back then, the reason Herbert Asbury says that, this time period were the last of the great gangs of New York is because gangs in numbers could be up to 1,000 people or more in a gang who identified themselves as part of a gang, as part of the Paul Kelly gang, as part of Monk Eastman's gang, as part of the Dead Rabbits, as part of the Puguglies, as part of the Natives. And after this time period that's discussed in Herbert Asbury's book, in this one incident, they said that was the last of the great gangs, meaning especially in numbers. And they needed those numbers because they actually had to carry out one in order to have protection from the politicians, you know, voter fraud. They needed to have the people there and the gangsters there to vote, to repeat vote, to make people go to the polls to vote, or to intimidate people from voting. So they needed them in big numbers. Here is a map of the area I'm talking about. These are the streets in Lower Manhattan. We have Little Water Street that doesn't exist anymore. It was an area where sort of these 5 points here came together. Anthony Street, Orange Street, Cross Street. They have different names now. Most of them have different names. Some of them are the same, I think. Mott Street still exists. That's where Little Italy is today. But this area became infamous for just, you would like, even the police wouldn't go into this area of the 5 points unless they were in groups of 6 or more, because it was so dangerous for them. It was so dangerous for the police. In fact, the police for a long time wouldn't even wear uniforms. They got uniforms for a while, and then they stopped wearing their uniforms as so not to be identified as police, because then they would be targeted for violence. That's how dangerous an area was. And yet people, poor families, lived there in tenements. First was the Irish, and free people of color, and then some Germans, and then later on, obviously, obviously the Native Americans were there first. Then in New Amsterdam we had people from Amsterdam. We had different invasions. We had the British. We had Spanish rule for a little bit, but I'm talking more modern times when we turn from like the 1800s to the 1900s. Here's the next picture. This is kind of like what it might have looked like down these streets. The buildings built right at the street. A lot of them very dilapidated. You have horse-drawn carriages, lots of people, push cart vendors. What is a push cart vendor? It's somebody who literally has a cart that might have at one point been attached to a horse and wagon, and where they would pull up on the side, line the sides of the street, and that's where they would sell their wares as opposed to actually having stores. And they were crowded. There was lawlessness. There was tremendous poverty and disease. Not a great place to live. Before we had brick buildings, a lot of the buildings were built with wood. Here's a picture of that. I mean, look at these sagging buildings, these sagging streets and things like it, you cannot imagine, the how stifling it was, and people lived in these places, and the people who own these buildings and own those properties found that they could make money by putting more and more and more families or people or individuals into these homes, into these tenements, into these buildings. So they lived crowded, crowded, crowded. Which is why you had street gangs. Why wouldn't they go hang out on the street? This picture has been used as sometimes for the cover of the Gangs of New York book. Here's a picture of it's an alley. And look, all of a sudden, imagine walking past an alley, and what do you see? You see these guys lurking about. If you look back, there's guys all the way in the back. You have something on the ground there. I don't know if it's garbage. I don't know if it's a body. You have a guy here who's holding a stick that kind of looks like a bat, but it's like a stick. Obviously, it's a weapon. They look like they're tough. They're ready to fight. They're ready for trouble. And protecting your particular area, your particular territory was very important. Next picture. I spoke about the politicians. This is a picture of the former Tammany Hall. This is where many deals were made. The politicians assembled in the 4th Ward of New York, and they used their positions of political power and influence to enrich themselves a lot of the time. They wanted to keep that power, and they utilized the gangs and the gang leaders to help them keep that power, to help keep them in office. At the time of Paul Vaccarelli, the 5 Points Gang, or the Paul Kellys, their biggest rivals were a gang that was led by a gangster who was Jewish. And his name was Monk Eastman, and they were called the Eastman Gang. Here's a picture of Monk Eastman. Get a load of him. Okay. He looks a little young here, but like he's been in some fights, okay? And but he was a huge guy. I'm going to show you a picture of Paul Kelly sitting next to Monk Eastman. Monk Eastman led a gang at the same time as Paul Kelly or Paul Vaccarelli. And so you had the Paul Kellys, or the 5 Points Gang. They were called both. And then you had the Eastman Gang. Monk Eastman was not his original name. He changed his name. Here's a picture later on of Monk Eastman and Paul Vaccarelli. This is when Tammany Hall and the politicians there forced a truce upon these two gangs, and I'll tell you why. Okay, we have here's a picture on the right. That's Paul Vaccarelli, and on the left is Monk Eastman. You could see, I don't know if you could tell here, and if you guys can see so well, look at the size of Monk Eastman's hands. The size of his head, his shoulders, how big he is. Paul Vaccarelli, was actually quite, small, but he was mighty, and powerful and an amazing fighter. And at one point, things there were so many fights and vendettas between the Eastman gang and the Five Points gang, and the people they numbered again up to 1,000 people, that nothing could be, like, work wasn't getting done. People couldn't go into the Five Points. Police couldn't go into the Five Points. It got so bad that the protectors of these two men, who, whenever themselves or members of their gang got in trouble, would get them out of trouble, said, "We're going to withdraw our support for you. We're going to withdraw our help, our protection of you, unless you make peace." And the two of them did make a peace. And that peace lasted for a while. And then there was an incident, of course, where a member of Paul Vaccarelli's gang did something, murdered a member of Eastman's gang. Eastman came to Paul Vaccarelli and said, "You better take care of this or we're going to do X." And Vaccarelli said, "If you do X, we're going to, you know, you guys are going to, like, all be dead." Right? So no more peace. So what did Tammany Hall do? They wanted to force another peace agreement between these two. But these two men, they were both, you know, leaders and understood their gangs and understood the mentality of their gangs. They said, "We can't just, like, have a peace. We've had this major thing happen where one person was killed, and now we have a vendetta and they have to get back at this other gang. So what are we going to do?" The two men agreed to have a public fight, and, like, boxing, hitting each other. No weapons, but a boxing match, essentially, the two of them. And Paul Vaccarelli, who's half the size of Monk Eastman, agreed to this. That's how tough he was. And what ended up happening in this fight between these two men, and it was public, and thousands came and attended and watched. All the gang members came, and other spectators came. And for 2 full hours, these two men beat each other bloody, to the point where they nearly killed one another just through fighting, just with their hands. And it got so bad that ultimately their own gangs stopped the fight after over 2 hours of this, so that their leaders wouldn't die. And they pulled each other away and they called it a truce. And they called it not a truce, they called it, even. I forgot I can't think of the word, what I'm looking for. So what I'm looking for, when you both don't win, you both don't lose. So it was over, and there was another piece. Paul Vaccarelli wanted to, move up in the world and make a little more of himself and move away from the gang activity. He bought this building. He started this social club, and things like that. He actually had a couple different ones, but this was one of his main ones. This was the headquarters of the largest of the and best organized gangs of New York. Okay. And in this picture, you see this club. They called it an athletic club. They had a bar. You see, it says lager, it says beer. And he had different locations, different names. Sometimes it was called the Little Naples Club for Naples, Italy, and so forth. It had dancing, it had a bar, and it also is where the gang conducted their main operations. I'm talking about the Five Points gang. Again, the what we know as the mob or the mafia today, organized crime today, you know, uh, they had versions of it, of course, in the old countries, but in this country, we really have people like, in terms of an actual organized um, group with, leaders that were quite effective. The most best organized, they really have Paul Vaccarelli and Monkey's but more so Paul Vaccarelli to point to as sh- making the blueprint for how to organize people into criminal operations. Here's a picture of him as he got older, a little bit older. You can see uh, he had, as we would say here up here, a little bit more of a schnoz on him than in the AI picture of him on my thumbnail. This is him as he's getting a little older. And ultimately, he moved out of lower Manhattan. And first, he moved to up his operations to Harlem, all the way uptown. If you know anything about Manhattan, Manhattan is long, and it's an island. It's surrounded by water. And the Lower East Side is the side that's closest to Brooklyn. And if you go all the way to the upper part of Manhattan, that's where you have Harlem. And that also was an Italian and Jewish enclave, and an enclave for the working class people. He moved his operation to Harlem, and Paul Kelly went into real estate. That's what he said he was doing. He's going into real estate. I found a lot of documentation on some of his real estate transactions that were really quite interesting. There was one building that was like bought and sold back and forth, like every single year between himself and other family members. It's a little weird. Um, and he started to try to legitimize himself. Here's a picture of him with one of the Tammany Hall politicians. Here he is here. You could see he's not, this man is one of the Irish Tammany Hall leaders, political leaders. Here is Big Tim's, I'm going to show you a picture here. Big Tim Sullivan. Here's Big Tim Sullivan. He was a Tammany Hall leader that offered both Monkeysman and Paul Vaccarelli protection. Big Tim Sullivan had a brother who died mysteriously somehow on the train tracks under suspicion. And their family had an estate in the Bronx. Back then, the Bronx actually had estate homes, farm homes. They had farmland in what is now known as the Bronx. And ultimately, when Paul Vaccarelli went into real estate, he bought at auction the estate that was owned by Big Tim Sullivan's brother. I just want to tell you, they say Paul Kelly built a disciplined criminal organization that combined the following: gambling, prostitution, extortion, right? Meaning, give me money, or, you're going to pay me protection money, or your store is going to burn down. That's extortion. Election fraud. That was one of the ways they got protection and made money. and violence when necessary. Oh, they also in Paul Kelly's clubs, they had a boxing club in there. That fight and the big rivalries when it became so dangerous that the political leaders had to step in to call for a truce was between 1903 and 1905, when they fought numerous bloody battles over gambling territories, prostitution districts, political influence, because they were having open warfare. One second here. Then, here, let me show you. This is a headline from the New York Times, what they said about Paul Kelly. After he did real estate for a little bit, he got into organizing of labor unions. And this is a headline from the New York Times. It says, how one Bowery boy, right? They called it the Bowery section. The Bowery boy rose from pugilist to power in labor. You know, what was the thing that defined a particular era in the United States? It could be like in the 1960s, you might say the Vietnam War was, the defining event going on for this generation. Well, at the turn of the century, the early 1900s and beyond, it really, it wasn't prohibition. It wasn't, it was the rise of the labor movement, the rise of the workers' unions. This was, the defining movement that changed the lives of, millions, especially in New York. New York at that time was the biggest manufacturing capital city in the world. There was more manufacturing happening in New York City. Nowadays, we don't think of manufacturing happening in New York City. Back then, manufacturing was happening in New York City. All kinds of manufacturing. And Paul Kelly, before he got into the longshoremen's, the first thing he organized was, when he was in Harlem, was the rag pickers, which were, people who would go around picking up scraps of material or metal or glass and things like that they would gather. They were like scavengers, and sell it back to businesses that they could possibly use for other things. They would find it on the street. They had no union, they had no organization or anything like that. But it was Paul Vaccarelli who organized them and said, we're gonna get you guys together and you're gonna have a union. And you're gonna be able to demand certain prices for the things that you gather. The business owners who were buying from the people who were picking up the scrap workers said no. They were like, no, we're not gonna negotiate with you guys. Who are you? And back then, the employers, the manufacturers who were buying it, the business owners, employed gangsters of their own to intimidate the workers or the people they were, who were trying to unionize. Well, when you have Paul Vaccarelli as head of your union, the dynamic changes very quickly, because what happened was, as soon as they employed gangsters, the manufacturers who were buying the materials, as soon as they employed gangsters to intimidate the workers, and Paul Kelly was head of this group that he was organizing, in the first week after this happened, 3 of the gangsters that were employed came up murdered. which sent a chill down the spines of those that hired them, that they could be next. And from there, Paul Vaccarelli, he legally changed his name back to Vaccarelli. Now he's going by Vaccarelli. He used this experience to become head of the Longshoremen's Union, the dock workers. They were striking, and people wanted them to end the strike. And he was very well respected. They did not get the concessions that they were looking for, which was a pay increase of like a nickel or something like that. And this is a picture of some of these longshoremen at the time when, I think it was at the time when Paul Vaccarelli became head of the union. The workers ultimately ousted him as head of the union, only to bring him back a couple years later as vice president, because they needed his power and influence. He served as a vice president during the late 1910s and early 1920s. He remained influential in waterfront labor disputes. He was accused by many historians of providing criminal muscle in labor conflicts, though the extent of his direct involvement is difficult to document from surviving records. In my opinion, I don't think he would have survived as the head of unions if he was actually backing the gangsters that were hired by the employers to be what they called labor sluggers, to beat up the workers who were trying to organize. He left the longshoremen's. He became head of other unions, hod carriers, HOD carriers. He was head of the masons unions, bricklayers union. He was never a mason, never a bricklayer. He was never a hod carrier. They said he worked for a little bit as a longshoreman. I don't know if he did. He became head of the musicians union, and he was no musician. So he sort of made a living kind of coming in and being head of a union when something was about to go down. And at that time with the labor movement, violence was an unfortunate part of it, and it was used to intimidate both ways. At first, it was the manufacturers or employers who, oh, Fred, okay, thank you. Fred Carleone. Okay, let me look him up. At first, it was the employers and things like that who hired gangsters to be what they called labor sluggers. But ultimately, and this is really especially the case with my relative, Jacob Gershapiro and Louis Sklepi Buchalter, they were really, Paul Kelly, you could say Paul Kelly was before them in organizing and working for the unions. But Shapiro and Buchalter were the first who really embedded themselves with the unions in what was later called labor racketeering. And this started this engagement that has lasted for many years between the mob and labor unions, as documented in another Martin Scorsese movie about Jimmy Hoffa, with one movie called The Irishman, that they have a scene where, they're coming to Hoffa for a loan because the gangsters, they're building Las Vegas at the time, and they can't go to regular financial institutions for loans, so they went to unions. Unions were collecting money as dues from the workers, and they were able to give loans out. So there was a mutually beneficial relationship ultimately between organized crime and the unions on the workers' side. At first, like I said, the manufacturers used labor sluggers to intimidate workers. But you have to understand the numbers were with the workers. They had tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of workers who there was no way there would be enough gangsters to do anything that could intimidate all these thousands of workers ultimately. But could the gangsters do things to intimidate the business owners? Absolutely. Because, let's say in New York, you have several hundred uh, large manufacturer owners of businesses, but you have hundreds of thousands of workers. Could a mob do something to intimidate a few hundred people? Of course they could. On the opposite way, is there anything that they could do when things really got going to intimidate them on the other way? Not as much, but they still were the employers. I mean, they still had the ability to lock out workers, fire workers, put them in unsafe conditions, and make their lives miserable. And if they didn't like it, they could leave and starve, So, let's see. So I'm going to wrap this part up right now about Paul Vaccarelli, also known as Paul Kelly, from the Five Points Gang. He led an amazing life, and he is in my book because of his later in his life with his activity with union organizing, and Jacob Garshapiro and Louis Lepke-Buchalter's involvement with the labor unions. They crossed paths. And because of this incident that happened, it put my relative on a course that changed his life, that he couldn't have imagined as a boy in Russia who didn't come to the United States till he was around 11 years old. What these people have accomplished in their short lives, coming from one country to a new country, not speaking the language, coming with literally nothing but their associations, family, and things like that, no money. And what they did to change things, the environment, America, it's just absolutely incredible what one person can do in their lifetime. By the way, Monk Eastman, who the other thing I want to say is, so ultimately, the Paul Kelly group, the Five Points Gang, they were mostly an Italian gang. The Monk Eastman gang were mostly Jewish gang. And it was because the leaders were, Monk Eastman was Jewish and Paul Vaccarelli was Italian. However, there was some crossover both ways. There were some Italians who were part of the Eastman gang, and there were some Jewish gangsters who were part of the Five Points gang. One of the people who was part of the Five Points gang was a guy named Johnny Torrio. Johnny Torrio started in New York in the Five Points gang. He was a disciple of Paul Vaccarelli. Ultimately, he was very organized, and ultimately, he moved to Chicago to organize there, um, and brought with him another gangster who was part of the Five Points gang, another Italian gangster by the name of Al Capone, who got his start. Both Johnny Torrio and Al Capone, who went to Chicago, got their start with Paul Vaccarelli in the Five Points gang. And on the other side, with Monk Eastman, are a lot of the famous Jewish gangsters, although my relative was never part of the Eastman gang, because by the time he came of age where he was a gangster, Monk Eastman was on a serious decline after World War One. He did serve in World War One. He was just prior to that, he was arrested, and then he was arrested again after World War One. So he faced a demise that was not pretty. Monk Eastman did, but for a long time he was a force to be reckoned with. But because of this overlap, and because ultimately, we did have truces between these two gangs, not that they necessarily worked together, but there was an understanding among them, and they shared physical space. They lived in neighborhoods adjacent to one another. It ultimately led to people like Lucky Luciano, who started the Syndicate, which was a group, a commission of both Italian and Jewish gangsters, a voting commission, to make the organized crime more disciplined and less violent, and make decisions together, divide up territories and things like that. Okay, so thank you for hitting the thumbs up. Let's see here. And let me close this out. Stop sharing. All right. This is the end of my little talk about Paul Vaccarelli. I did want to get to give you a quick update about Spencer, just briefly. Maybe I'll edit this out afterwards. Spencer has been doing very well at his new adult group home that he moved into. I want to say the end of February. Was that long ago that he moved into the adult group home? Since I was on, I don't know, I know since I was on TikTok, obviously, but since I was on YouTube, Spencer moved into the first adult group home in April when he turned 21, a year before that. And he was in there for 30 to 40 days before he was kicked out because it was not an appropriate placement for him. They didn't know how to deal with him and so forth. Then he was kicked out, and he was home for almost 9 months, 8, 9 months. For a long time, he had nothing. He had no day program. He had no group home. He had nothing, no structure. He was no longer in school because in New Jersey, if you are profoundly autistic, you can go to public school till you're 21. And that was a very hard time, and I think I was on YouTube then when this happened. I was. So then he got into a day program that was not a good day program. The best day programs in group homes they're waiting lists for them, often very long waiting lists. And it's because they're good. So there's waiting lists. The ones that have availability tend to be the ones that aren't good. And he went to a day program that was not good. Ultimately, I pulled him out of that day program when he came home one day with we his eye was red, which ultimately turned into a black eye. And when I talked to the assistant director and I said, "What happened to Spencer that day at the day program?" She said, "Oh, he must have punched himself in the eye." Spencer's never punched himself in the face ever in his life. And I could see as the marks came in that it was actually, he would have had to gone, using the hand that he normally would use, which he's right-handed, he would have had to go across his body to do that. And you could see the things of the knuckles. It would be physically impossible for him to, where the knuckles were, to have made a mark like this in this direction. But what was clear was that somebody had hit him in this direction using their right hand. And the police in the town where that day program was ultimately refused to investigate it. Because why? Because they said, we have to report it to this agency that does investigations into what they call institutional abuse. And I said, this is horrible, ridiculous. Imagine for a second, this is your child. I told to the officers there, I said, imagine this is your child, right? Who can't advocate for themselves, who's limited nonverbal or limited verbal, who has intellectual disabilities, comes home with a black eye, and you're getting no answers from the program about what happened. They refused to show me video from that day that he came home with the black eye. And you go to the police and they say, oh, it happened at this day program for people with intellectual disabilities. We can't investigate it. Even though it's in our town, we can't investigate because it has to go through an agency. I said, these agencies don't do anything. They don't help. They don't investigate. They do nothing because it's not in their interest as a government agency to shut down day programs when there's not enough day programs currently, or group homes for that matter, to serve all the people who need them. So it's not in their interest to shut down anything. So it's not in their interest to really investigate anything. I was horrified by that, but there was nothing I could do to change it at that time, other than to pull him out of that day program for his own safety. But it meant him back at home with us, without structure, without therapies, without, any programs or anything. And he's no longer in school. Thank God he got into this. First, he got into the day program that's associated with this agency that he's part of. And if you guys remember, he went through several different like audition kind of things. They had him come in and spend one day in the day program. And then it took like 2-3 months. I don't remember how long it was. It was a month before he went back and he spent 5 days there. And then ultimately he did another like little trial, and eventually there was an opening and he was accepted into the day program, and that was thrilling. And he did very well in the day program. Miraculously, it wasn't long after that, they had just built their newest adults group home. They own many adults group homes. They're one of the 2 biggest agencies in northern New Jersey that are the best. And they just built their newest one, and for it to open, it has to be 75% occupied. There are 4 residents there. I think what happened is that somebody had pulled out for whatever reason. I could be anything. Yeah. And so I'll tell you all the good, really quickly, all the good news. And then one little thing I'm a little concerned about. Um, they had an opening. I think somebody pulled out and they said, would you like to have Spencer try? And we said, of course. And I mean, you have to jump. You can't, if you hesitate at all, you know, you don't know when the next time it could be. The next opening at an appropriate group home, that's a good group home. You know, if you want a terrible group home where there's abuse, you could probably get in tomorrow. But if you want to go into a very good group home that has terrific training and programming and excellent staff and safety, all these things that you want, there's going to be a wait. And you don't know if that wait is going to be 6 months or 6 years, literally. It could be that long because when you're talking about the adult system, people, God willing, theoretically, move into an adult group home and stay there for decades. They stay there for the rest of their lives because they need people to take care of them for the rest of their lives until, you know, even as they grow old, even after their parents pass away. Okay. We did have a meeting with he's been excellent at both. They had a medication change for Spencer, which really has helped him a lot. He has a wonderful psychiatrist that he sees who prescribes his medications. The only thing is, some of his medications make him very hungry and slightly lethargic, so a little more sleepy. So when you have the combination of those two things, and then sometimes Spencer will eat out of boredom. He's gained a lot of weight, for him, and has been less physically active. So, you know, listen, him being, a little overweight, it's not a big deal, really. Ultimately, he's healthy. He has blood work done. He's fine. We just have to figure out. We tried to do a cutback with the you know with the prescribing doctor of one of the medications that made him a little more tired, would make him want to sleep during the day. Of course, he's a growing young man. I mean, I don't know if you guys have had kids who are in their early 20s, but they like to sleep, sometimes. But we had them cut back on one of them, and they did notice an increase in agitation when they cut back on that medication. So we went back to what he originally prescribed, and with it comes a little bit of lethargy and the hunger and the weight gain. But that is better than having him in a group home and feeling anxiety, anxious, agitated, and so forth. The other thing, but ultimately, like I said, that's not a big deal. I know, at least I know he's being fed, he's eating, for sure. And he does still come home. Uh, the general schedule is 3 days a week, Tuesdays, Thursdays. After the day program, we pick him up. Today's Wednesday. So today's not one of the days we pick him up. Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. So Tuesday and Thursday, after the day program, pick him up, come back here. He spends the afternoon with us. We'll do something. He'll have an early dinner, and then it goes back to the group home. And then on Saturdays, he'll spend the day with us and go back, have an early dinner and go back. And, we'll try to do something in the summer. The weather cooperates. We do hope to take him to the beach. The only thing that was reported to us at a recent meeting that has me concerned, because it is a regression for him, is Spencer, when living with us and over the years, his speech has continued to progress and develop where he's using several words together, right? When he asks for things. I want iPad, I want iPad, please. Sometimes he drops the please, but I want iPad, or I need help, or, you know, I want toasty, what is it called? Toasty Cheez-Its, toasty spicy Cheez-Its. Like, he used descriptive words. He can put many words together. They told me that late, he started kind of reverting back to the using just one word when he wants something, needs something, as opposed to putting many words together. And that's a regression. So he'll just say Cheez-Its. He'll just say iPad. He'll just say water, uh, you know, or if he needs help, instead of I need help, or I need help, please, or help, please, he'll just say help. Um, and just using one word is a regression. So, you know, we talked to them about strategies, and of course, when we have him here, we are really focusing on getting him back to using more words. I don't know if it's because there's less verbal interaction with him at the group home by the caregivers or not. The other residents, there's two males, Spencer being one of them, and two females. The other residents, the other male is totally nonverbal. Um, and the two females one of them is pretty much, she's not totally nonverbal, but she's close to it. And the other one has verbal ability, but it's difficult to understand her. So Spencer's speech is quite clear for a child like him. And he, being with other kids who, I shouldn't say kids, they're all adults in their 20s, who are not as verbal as he is. Maybe perhaps the staff doesn't have that expectation of him. Thank you, Becky, so much. Thank you. Maybe they don't have that expectation of him to use as many words because they're used to the other kids who don't have as many words or abilities. But for him, that's a regression. And his use of language is essential to his survival in this life. It's the way he self-advocates for his wants and needs. I'm all done, if he doesn't want to continue doing something, instead of prior to him having words or the ability to use words to communicate, having phrases that he could use, he would simply melt down, scream, things like that to communicate when he didn't want to do something, right? Let's say you're doing an activity, he was all done with it, and he didn't know how to say, I'm all done. So he would just kind of drop to the ground and yell and stuff like that and carry on. Just like little kids do when they don't have the language, they'll communicate with you, I've had enough, by yelling and crying. But I'm really, really pleased with the program, and I'm pleased with the staff. There has been turnover, which, is to be expected. It's not easy work. This agency does pay their direct care staff better than most agencies do, although the people who do direct care with population like Spencer are worth their weight in gold and should be paid more. That's everywhere. They should be paid way more than they're getting. And even though this agency does have a better pay scale than most places, it's still not enough. And because the work is difficult and physically intense, right? Physically helping somebody who's an adult brush their teeth, right? Do activities of daily living is draining, is physically draining. It's draining on Al and I, when we have to help him with everything. Um, he needs, somebody to hold his hand crossing the street. He needs, he needs, he just doesn't have a sense of danger. So that's to be expected that there's some turnover. So sometimes when I go to the house, a lot of times I see a new face and I'll say, "Oh, hello, my name, I'm Julie," and I say, "I'm this," and my first week here, and so forth. So we do have some of that. And that's, for me, okay, as long as they're trained and it's fine. But I don't know how Spencer deals with that, you know, all the time. Because once he gets used to, oh, this is the person I go to when I want something to eat. Or if my iPad's not working, I say iPad, but it's really like a Kindle, not a Kindle, like an Amazon Fire tablet, right? It's not an expensive iPad. It's like one of the Amazon tablets. If it's not working, I go to this person, I need help. Like that's the person I tend to go to. And then all of a sudden they're no longer there. And now you have a new face. Who do I go to for this? I don't know how he's reacting to that change or those changes. But I never see them short staffed, which is very good because there's times and places where they don't have enough staff, and that's a serious thing. They always have enough staff. It's just they had changes in that staff. As far as I go, I've been doing pretty well, it sort of a surreal experience, what happened on YouTube and the that ultimately led me to stop utilizing YouTube at all. Um, when I restarted my channel, I just took it down. I didn't delete it, but I just took it down because I didn't want, anything. Um, when I restarted my channel, after it's been months since I went live, months, to hear people kind of still talking about me, my name, like certain things was like, wow, like, you know, I mean, I'm like, I moved on, like, I don't know what's going on there, but whatever. It is, it is. Um, and but I still have my TikTok channel that I, still make videos on all the time about autism, like I always have. I never stopped doing that. And um, uh, that's about it, basically. I could say more, but I don't really want to because I really don't want, I didn't think you know, I didn't think the coverage on me it wasn't like um, equivalent to not just the situation, but like, I mean, the amount of time and energy and hours was crazy. And Al is doing really well. I would say he's doing really well. We went away a few nights down the shore. That was really nice. And he's been working, and my mom is doing okay. She had medical issues. She had that heart surgery, and then 3 weeks later, after the heart surgery, if you recall, she went into congestive heart failure. And there was a long recuperation process for her with a visiting nurse twice a week. We hired somebody. I mean, I constantly go over there and see my mom and help her with things, but still we wanted to make sure, she was covered with, just because her balance wasn't terrific and everything. So we hired somebody to come to, so she had a physical therapist 3 times a week. She had a visiting nurse twice a week. And in addition to that, um, she had daily, 7 days a week, a person come for an hour in the morning, and like from like 8:30 to 9:30, and then an hour at from 4:30 to 5:30. And it's this lovely woman who works for the woman who lives next door to my mom. And my mom lives in a 55 and over community, and so we were very lucky that she could come an hour before she went to work for the woman next door. And also, she's there during the day. God forbid, something's needed. She's right there next door working for the other woman. But we paid her to come twice a day. My mom said, I don't need her twice a day. My mom was she's mentally sharp. Like, my mom is super mentally sharp. It's just her body's not keeping up with her. And she's like, I don't need this. Da, da, da. My mom could be a little bit, strong willed in that way. And she's like, I'm going to tell her she doesn't need to come anymore. We're like, no, you're not. We're like, you can make once a day is fine. If you don't want her to come in the morning, just have her come at 4:30. That's it. But just for everybody's peace of mind, I mean, if there's a day I can't get over to my mom, we want to make sure that somebody is seeing her every single day. She continued with physical therapy. So now physical therapy is now only once a week. Um, when it was 3 times a week, she started out with the walker. She's not using the walker anymore, which is wonderful. And I went in for testing for a friend of mine who has been pretty ill. And I actually had already been in for testing, and I went in for 2 more rounds of different tests all the way on the east side of Manhattan, which is a big pain in the butt to get to if you don't, coming from Jersey, with NYU Langone Hospital. And the second, I was deemed a good candidate, but there's a lot of, like, you literally have to talk to so many people, like even a what is it, a medical ethicist or something like that, someone who does medical ethics. And they don't do a lot of communication. They don't want the parties to communicate with one another for a lot of reasons. And I do get it, because God forbid there's a problem. Let's say you donate an organ to somebody, and they, they go through with that, and there's a failure, like a kidney failure, and then the person who's now donated carries this guilt with them that, oh my God, what did I do? How did I hurt? And the other way around too. I know there were other people being tested to see if they could be possible donors. And the second testing I went through this summer, the second round of testing, oh my God, it was such a long day. It was like from 7:30 to 5:30. I did all kinds of testing. It took me like days to recover from that. And for whatever reason, there was a little concern about one thing with me. Once they took my stuff, then they have stuff that they have to do with the potential recipient. And I don't know exactly what that entails, but there's a bunch of things. They're very cautious. They're not going to do anything that's going to put somebody in jeopardy physically. And they want to make sure the matches are okay. They did make me come back. It was only supposed to be those 2 long rounds of testing. They did make me come back for a third. It wasn't a full round of tests, but they were retesting some things with me, of tests I had already done. I don't know what the concern was specifically, if it was because of me, if it was because of him, if it was, what the deal was, but there was a request for me to come back, which I did, and redo a couple of those tests, which I did. And that was a couple weeks ago now, and I haven't heard anything yet. So I don't really know where things are. Um, I understand why they don't communicate a lot of stuff, but that's where it is. But I could tell you, the one day of testing, like, oh my God, they really shouldn't. I want to write them a letter, like, and say, you really shouldn't do like all those tests in one day. It's too much for a person. Like, do it over 2 days, not one day. Yes, yes, Ninja Girl. Um, I restarted the channel because I have a speaking engagement that I committed to, having to do with my book, A Gangster in the Family, and I'm going through with that. And I wanted a couple videos up um, because it's coming out soon, and I needed it for this, for that. And I just did a video just now about a person who is in my book, a very small part of the book, but a very pivotal role in the book. And that is really it. Um, so that's the update there. Yeah, Al's good. Spencer's twin is good. My son is good. And I'm trying to think. I have a lot going on actually. Um, Meetings and so forth, and just a lot of things happening right now. So it is what it is. Mm-mm-mm. But I hope you're doing good. It's so nice to see you. I did hear, I mean, I've been keeping up a little bit, and I did hear that Granny was successful in court yesterday, and I'm thrilled for her. Uh, and, you know, so very happy for her. I miss you guys. That's it. And I hope you have a good day. And Becky, if you're still here, Carleone, I will put something, maybe I'll put something in the comments of this video about it. That's it. So nice to see you, sweetheart. Have a good day. Oh my goodness, it's already 4:30. Oh, good. I'm going to put something in that. I do want to look them up real quick. If you want to just wait 1 second, let me just do a quick thing. Did you put his first name? You said he was in New York. Hold on. What was his first name again? It was what? Thank you. Yeah. It's funny. Carleone sounds a lot like Corleone. We'll find out. Mwah. Talk to you guys soon. Bye bye. Thanks for joining. I appreciate it so much. Exit. End.